teach us about heavy timber and its role in the city.
Mass timber.
Mass timber.
Oh, well, definitely works. All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. My name is Juhi Goel, and I'll be presenting on the thesis Inform, Engaging Climate Action Through Didactic Architecture. I'd like to begin by thanking my committee, Professor Jana van der Goot, for being so patient and insightful, and for actually inspiring this thesis a semester ago with her studio. Professor Carl Dupuy for beating us up, and Professor Ming Hu, who is my third committee member, who's been very helpful in figuring out how to build this thing. And with that, I'd like to start off by taking you through the agenda for the thesis. So I'm going to introduce the issue at hand, talk about this site in Boston, introduce you to the process of arriving at the party, and then quickly take you through the program, and then focus the presentation on the experience of this project. So the premise of this project is that climate change is real, and the climate is changing, and so must architecture. So most of the materials that are contributing to this climate change come from our cities, and these are the two materials that architects build in that have an extremely high embodied energy. So both steel and concrete have a huge percentage of use in high-rise architecture. So steel contributes to 3% of the total anthropogenic greenhouse gas emissions by material, and concrete takes up 5%, which means in our cities today, the steel and concrete that make up our high-rise architecture contribute to 8% of greenhouse gases. And against this background, wood offers an alternative solution. So wood is the only such material made from nature that, when harvested responsibly, can lead us to build extremely sustainable high-rise structures. Over the course of its life, wood absorbs carbon dioxide and then stores it away in its substance, and then releases it at the end of its life cycle. And this means that if we allow this wood to exist in our buildings, that wood is captured away for the period of time that the building exists. So a recent study by SOM that was done comparing a high-rise 42-story building in concrete and the same building in timber revealed that this was the difference in the estimated carbon dioxide emissions between the two buildings. And this by itself is a strong case for mass timber in high-rise architecture. And so through this thesis, I will be examining or exploring the design characteristics of a high-rise mass timber building in a site with a wide variety of users in order to spark the conversation about materials and processes that engage us in climate action. The site will incorporate sustainable design practices like the use of algal biofacades and a biofiltration pond, in addition to the use of cross-laminated timber, which in itself is a material that is pushing the agenda for climate action. And additionally, the main spaces of this site, or of this project, will engage its users in didactic architecture, or architecture as a teaching tool to really start this conversation about climate action. So introducing you to the site is located in Boston, and it is right at the intersection of downtown Boston and the North End District. So it's located right along the Greenway, and some of the most important landmarks next to the site are the Boston City Hall, Faneuil Hall and Quincy Market, and the New England Aquarium, with that being the site. This is really important because this means that the site has a very high foot traffic, and if the agenda speaks to really drawing in people to talk about climate change, then that increased foot traffic really helps the thesis itself. It also helps that the site is very well connected to the rest of the city, so public transit is just a block away. And so, needless to say, the site gets a lot of people throughout the day. So this particular site was appealing for a high-rise mass timber structure for two reasons. One, it is currently a parking garage that is in the talks for redevelopment. And the latest proposal puts forward these two glass skyscrapers that I think represent the kind of architecture that is coming up in Boston and in a lot of other cities today in order to address the issue of density. And in a way, this speaks to the role that we can play as architects in taking care of our carbon footprint. Because more buildings like this means more concrete, more steel, more glass, and those aren't necessarily helping the issue of climate change. The second thing that was really attractive to me about this site was that the New England Aquarium right across from the site is currently in the works for a huge renovation. And in addition to changing their building itself, they also want to introduce a public promenade called the Blue Way that will connect the Greenway, or the site of the Big Dig, a former site of the Big Dig, to the waterfront, with a promenade of exhibits that talk about the aquarium's climate action efforts, mostly to do with aquaculture and sort of aquarium-related exhibits. But this promenade presents a great opportunity for the site to connect to this larger idea or this larger effort and convert this entire block into a climate action hub of sorts. So in arriving at the party, there were 2 or 3 main things that drove the process. One was that the site was originally restricted to this plot of land where the garage stood, but the sort of driveway or drop-off to the New England Aquarium presented an opportunity to expand that site and decide where we wanted to route people in and where we wanted to convert the public realm into solid versus void. Views were very important to think about view porosity and views in terms of access. And then a shadow study, considering this would be high-rise architecture. It was also challenging because a lot of buildings to one side of the site are high-rise and cast a lot of shadows. And then on the other side, further down, you have parks and the north end. So it was important to pick a building that had its height set back from the public realm so that the shadow itself would sort of pull back. And with that, I'd like to dive into the program. So this building has one level of green commercial programming. And I'll introduce you to those with the floor plans in. 4 levels of green incubators, and these are essentially an office program where there's various kinds and combinations of people that are coming together to work on sustainability startups and just sort of flexible organizations that are working towards sustainability initiatives, because there's no such hub in Boston right now. The building would mainly serve as a residential program, and so it would have 35 floors of mixed income residential. And then this idea of the green alley through the building, which is really sort of the essence of the thesis. The green alley itself will serve as a didactic promenade through the building that draws in the public into the building in order to experience the materials, the sustainable features of the building, and to interact with the people that are living and practicing the things that the building advocates. And then the building also has 4 floors of parking underground. So a quick note on the green alley. The green alley is strategically placed so that it allows for a transition from the vertical express elevators in a high-rise structure onto local elevators. And so that really allows for an opportunity for the residents that are just sort of going about their business, transitioning during the day, to meet with people that are there in that sky lobby place for just to experience the building from a public programming point of view. So with that, I'd like to start walking you through the floor plans and talking about the experience of this building. So for the first floor plan, I'd like to divert your attention to the boards here to talk about the plaza. The main spaces as you enter this building, or you would enter this building primarily from the side here, and that's because the public transit stop is located, at that junction where we saw in the site plan. And so a lot of the spaces as you enter the building are geared towards commercial programs that are still sustainable. And so they serve as a segue and a bridge between people who are just there to get some food or just there to buy some groceries, but it really starts to draw people into the program. And then as you enter the building, the first thing that you're greeted with is the biofiltration courtyard, which acts as a sort of reflection area at the center of the courtyard part of the building. The biofiltration pond is filtering the gray water systems of the building, and so it's an active system that is working on the building's role in climate action, while also serving as a central point for all these other public programs that are going on at the first floor. And then you would walk across the courtyard or through either of the paths into this reception of the building, where the elevators or the vertical circulations are divided between the residential program and the public program. So the reception here sort of aligns the public programming by a waste recycling and sorting facility that really draws the public into the systems and the processes that are going on in the building that have to do with addressing the issue of waste. So you enter, you have the biofiltration pond talking about grey water, and then the next thing you see is this sort of waste facility that is practicing waste management. So once you're in this reception area, you might be using the green incubator spaces, in which case the office layout occupies 4 floors of the courtyard building. And for now, this is just sort of a combination of an open office work area and meeting rooms. The residential, typical residential floor plan consists of a combination of 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms. So it currently has 4 one-bedrooms, 2 two-bedrooms, and 1 three-bedroom. And each floor is provided with 2 public balconies, or semi-public balconies, so that the residents can come together and start to practice some community gardening or miniature forms of community gardening in a way that every floor is also connected to that larger green alley. Excuse me. And this is the main space that I want to talk about, which is the sky lobby of the building. So we walked down here through the biofiltration courtyard and then sort of seen the waste processing facility. And then there have been users that either go to the office program or the residential program. But if you're just a visitor to this building, then you're most likely taking the elevator up to the resto bar in the sky lobby. The special feature about this resto bar is that it uses algal carbon capture facades as its sort of main design feature. And these systems are using the carbon dioxide generated by the building to produce algae that is then harvested in biomass labs in each of these floors. And the algae also gives away heat that can be harvested. And in addition, it's sort of actively reminding us that the building is working towards carbon capture itself. And so this is really sort of the biggest didactic reveal that the building is participating in. As we start to sort of step away from this building, the facade itself reminds the city of the larger role that architecture can play in didactic climate action. And this is really important because a lot of buildings have the potential to be sustainable, but it's important that architecture is constantly speaking to a larger audience and sharing the beauty and the effectiveness of some of the systems that it's using. The main structure of this building is made of cross-laminated timber, as Ed mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. And so while there have been a number of buildings that have used pure cross-laminated timber and stuck to purely wood, the height of this building is still experimental. It hasn't been built yet. And so I've used a hybrid concrete and mass timber structure in my building. And so it consists of a concrete core with link beams to the concrete core and spandrel beams that then hold the CLT panels that are about 8 inches thick. And these are modular panels, so they come at about 8 to 10 feet by 40 feet. And that is, of course, supported by glulam columns and then shear walls that keep the building in place. So really, when we take a step back and look at the different features of this project, there's the structure, the sort of bones of the project itself, which is the CLT material that is actively capturing carbon or has captured carbon and is storing that carbon away. There's systems like the biofiltration pond and the algal facade that is in real time sort of addressing what the building is generating for its residents. And then there's the larger picture of didactic architecture, which is constantly telling us that we need to start having this conversation about what each of us is working towards with climate action. With that, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Why did you put your tower on the south?
I'm sorry?
Why did you put your tower on the south?
Oh, right. So when I was starting to look at the New England Aquarium with its original design as well, this was already a public space, a sort of plaza, and the idea of adding to that to make a more significant public plaza was what drove me to sort of push the public plaza to this side. So that way, we would sort of have an outdoor plaza and an indoor-outdoor plaza, sort of hybrid structure, and then the promenade.
But you do understand it's not going to look like that. It's going to be in shadow.
Well, I did a sun study, a shadow study, and it does get a lot of shadow during the winter, but
Yeah, it's a
during
lot of shadow during summer too. This is 40-something stories tall, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look at that.
So I think because of the slight notch in the floor plan, that's minimized a little bit.
Okay. Next, your typical residential plan, that's not it, right? That's a mistake.
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I saw it there.
Oh, yeah.
And you didn't really spend time on the facades. We just have that one angle. What does the rest of the building look like? Is there a reason why you didn't really illustrate that? Or?
Yeah. So I think when I started out on this project, there were a lot of different layers to it. There was the structure itself, and so I really spent a lot of the semester thinking about CLT high-rise, which is fairly new, and making this building work, and then the idea that the interior experiences were driving that agenda of didactic architecture. So the only thing I knew about the facade is that it should highlight the algal panels. And so I just tried to push that forward along with the use of CLD.
And your green areas, wait a minute. Your green areas that separate, the tower into 3 parts. Did you look at other buildings that have features like that? And this is sort of a leading question. Usually they're at least 2 stories tall, so that you can get light deep into the building. So what happened there?
Well, I think the green areas that I have in this building are more so outward. They're for the people that are inside looking outward through the algal biofacades. And so the facade system itself is the focus, more so than passive daylighting in that particular floor.
Can you just explain the algal facade? Sorry. Can you just explain I've never heard of this.
Sure, yeah. So the algal facade. Yes, there's algae in there, and I'm still learning about it too, but I thought it was a really cool system to look into. But these are essentially panels that hold algae, and then they have a number of different sort of pipes and systems linked up to it. So if you can see, I don't know if you can see in this rendering, but oftentimes there will be sort of bubbling up carbon dioxide, and then the algae, or sometimes microalgae, especially in that case, because it's more grainy, but the algae essentially eats up that, or uses that carbon dioxide and produces heat, which can sometimes be harvested back into the system. But more importantly, it's a way to really capture that carbon and put it away.
See through it all the time? Does it get thick and splotchy and...
Right, so it does get thick and splotchy sometimes, and more so with the more dense algae panel that have a lot of mass, and this is microalgae. But I believe there's a system to collect that from the facade in a periodic time.
Can you talk a little bit about your connection to the waterfront? We talked about the connection to green and the connection to the algae, but it seems like there's a real strong opportunity there to connect people to the waterfront.
Sure, yeah. So when I was thinking about the site, I knew that a lot of the people that come here visit the New England Aquarium. It's actually the most visited site in Boston, I believe. It has 1.3 million visitors a year, or like 4,000 a day. And so I knew that when a large majority of people approach the site, I should address the approach to the aquarium itself, but also the Blue Way, which is part of the aquarium, but set to be sort of the main focus of this site now. And because this project is trying to join the agenda of climate action with the New England Aquarium, I thought it would be interesting to create a new space that is closer to the project, but also tied to the Blue Way. And so what I have here is, I have some seating that is an extension of the restaurant inside my building, but that seating also overlooks a fish farming sort of enclosed pond. And I haven't developed parts of the design that would become the Blue Way, because I assume that would be effectively the New England Aquarium's land. But I thought that would be the fish farming enclosure would, or not enclosure, but that water that is set aside for fish farming and offers an overlook for the people sitting on this plaza would be a nice segue to that program.
It seems like the treatment, if you're sort of keeping people away from the water, and I'm wondering if there's any thought about kind of varying that experience along the edge. It seems like you could have pushed and pulled a little bit and brought people closer. There's a little center piece for gathering, it looks, but I think that if you were to move this forward, that could be an opportunity there. I think also the idea of keeping a bigger plaza to the north seems like a gigantic plaza. The scale seems pretty vast there. I can see kind of smaller moments, kind of more comfortable spaces along the water just east of your project, but to the north it seems like it might be uncomfortable to stand in some of those spaces. They're just so open.
Mm-hmm.
You spent a lot of time on the structure and researching kind of a new, I know it's been done, I'm not sure it's been done to this height. So I think that's a really interesting component of this thesis, and you've spent a lot of time on it. I guess where it kind of falls short for me is the concrete is a reality, and you need it. So I think it would have been interesting to explore it happens on every floor. You call them concrete link and spandrel beams. I think those could have been celebrated, both perhaps on the facade and inside. Concrete does have, fly ash, and it does have recycled content. So, and you're trying to get people excited and educate them about the wood, but the concrete is a reality that you have. I think your floor plate probably would be quite a bit taller. I'm not sure what it is there, but if the concrete is supporting all those wood planks, I think you would have a bigger section there. And again, it could have been celebrated.
The concrete is actually, just to clarify, the concrete is just used on the first floor and the parking levels below in the flooring. It is used in the core and link beams above in the structure, but the flooring structure becomes cross-laminated timber after the first floor.
So the planks go on the typical floor, the planks go from the shear walls of the core to the perimeter columns?
Right.
And there's no concrete there?
Mm-hmm.
So, can I?
And just one more thing, and then Peter wants the microphone. This is a sign of good thesis. Everyone's fighting over the microphone. I think one of the things that you could have explored is the top of the building and the profile at the top. It's simply an extrusion all the way up, and maybe there could have been a way to celebrate the structure, the wood structure at the top level to create some kind of interesting profile on the top of the building that's kind of missing.
Mm-hmm.
I really appreciate what you've brought to the table. I think it's illustrating a way of practice that many of us are going to move into in the future. One piece that I would advocate for is a celebratory stair in that biofiltration courtyard that would exist as an alternate to the elevators or the exit stairs that are kind of packed away in the poche. It will not only kind of celebrate the use of wood and activate that space vertically, but speak to issues about health and wellness in it, in how we live our personal lives, in addition to the kind of communal aspect of sequestering more carbon in our buildings.
So there is, unfortunately, it's not visible in this rendering, but right across from this, there's a stair. It's not celebratory. I don't think I spent a lot of time designing it, but this is back here where people actually make decisions on what to do upstairs in the building.
Put a nice big stair that activates that whole atrium vertically. Yeah.
Got it. Great.
I think you have a great project. I think there's a lot of thought in it, so congratulations on that. What I was trying to get at when you talk about the structure, because it was unclear to me, the Lincoln spandrel beams, these do happen at every floor, correct?
I'm sorry?
The Lincoln spandrel beams, they do happen at each floor.
They do happen at each floor, yes.
So
it's
with
the
this
entire floor structure.
With this structure, what's the max height that's been tested where you wouldn't need those at each floor?
I believe the latest project was 18 stories, I think. Was that?
9 stories.
9 stories?
9 stories without the concrete.
Okay,
So
good.
that's the potential for the top.
18.
So
Yeah. Right.
18.
Now? Oh.
Yeah,
It has
An
been built?
18-story door has been built in UBC.
So I guess my question for you, understanding that, is I think that there's some tension, I know where it comes from, between the site and the scale of the building, the site demands, and this experimental construction type that you're trying to do.
Right.
And unfortunately, as I look at this, for all the good that you're doing with expressing, using this new building typology, the minute you have these spandrel beams coming out of every floor, I look at it as see construction stopping all the time, because you're still, even with the spandrel beams coming out, they're still being supported by the wood columns going up, it looks like.
Right.
And so it would have been interesting to explore, and I don't know, I'm not a structural engineer, I've never designed a skyscraper, so God help you, but
First time.
it would have been interesting to understand, granted the core itself probably needs to be concrete, but there's some kind of way you could have either stacked the buildings or done some kind of other structural ingenuity so that you're literally not having these concrete elements flying out at each single floor, because you can just imagine formwork every time you get a floor done is stopping. Now you're getting the beams in there and you have to stop again. It's just a slowdown in construction. So I think that's the one place where it begins to fall apart a little bit.
Sure.
But I appreciate the fact that you're pushing, and I like the idea. And that leads me to another point, which this is the thing that I struggle with it a bit, and I've seen this struggle kind of throughout a few of the theses now. It's like you have the core of your idea, which for you is really strong, and it's at odds with your site. And I wonder if it's, or perhaps it's at odds with your site because the site demands more density than the structure can provide. And so I wonder if there's a certain point where you say, I either need to like intentionally do a less dense building so that the core of my idea is really shining, or do I need to like reevaluate and find out? And I know that's crazy talk because you find your site like 2 semesters ago.
No, I think that's really valuable, and that was actually a big part of our of the way this thesis transformed. It went right from being a climatorium and a climate change museum to a skyscraper in a mixed-use program, and that's because I was considering this idea of using CLT in a structure that has been done before and pushing that idea forward. But then when I heard about this site and just the scale of the buildings that are being built in cities right now with high-rise architecture, I think that's a really valuable platform to test out this material. And there have been studies, by SOM and a few other companies that are really trying to push forward the height limits of mass timber. And granted, it's not there yet because it's still using concrete and we're still doing structural testing, but I think it's still valuable to push that height limit and start that conversation.
One last thought before I pass the mic off is, the other thing that jumped out at me as you were describing the development of your plans is this communal green space that's on every floor, on the corner of the building there.
Right, so so there are 2 such balconies that are shared by the residents on that floor.
I just wonder, excuse me, I just wonder if you consider, I think you talked about the green alley being more of an internal circulation thing, and I look at this happening on every single floor, and it just seems like they're going to be in shade a lot, like they could have been like 2 or 3 story spaces. If you had thought about, having more of a green exterior element that was happening as opposed to just these balconies that are, only going to be whatever the floor height is. It's a little bit more grand, if it would really come out there and do something more.
Yeah, thank you.
Very nice.
I'm going to be a little more difficult than my colleagues. I think the issue of push is something I would encourage you to do. What I'm looking at is, I think it's very well researched and I think it's competent. But what I would set back this week and say, how can I challenge myself a bit more? Because fundamentally what you have here is lever house made out of wood. And I don't see you challenging it more. You've got a parking garage, you've got a courtyard, you've got floors that are basically standard floors up, and I'd like to see I'd like to see you step back from this for a week and say, what can I really do with this? Spatially, for example. The courtyard right now is isolated from the neighborhood. You have to go through a little door to get into it. And the idea of that bringing in the high line, the low line, the big gig, into your building through to the waterfront. Rather than a series of segments, you have Atlantic Avenue sidewalk, building perimeter, yada yada yada, and they're all kind of segments, but there's no penetration through. Even visually, it's blocked off. Spatially, for example, it's floor, and then you said that's algae and that's not, and I'd really say go look at some construction that's been done or studies, adopt that and say how can I challenge it? And I think a thesis is more than just doing a good building. A thesis is saying, okay, given X, what do I question? And I think you need to, for your portfolio, do a critique of this. I would like you to take this a little farther, do a kind of appendix and saying, if I were to do it again, here's what I would do. Give yourself a week to do it, okay?
Thank you.
Well, the reason why I am sharing some comments that I kept quiet so far is because I have the intuition that this is a very beautiful and elegant building. And I think that this has to do with its form, but also with its relationship with the urban design. And I feel, frankly, that the position of of the courtyard is the one that I would use. Although I understand that there may be exposition problems, I have the feeling that I see an increasing number of buildings that are supposedly oriented well, but then they don't work from an urban design point of view. And sometimes, unfortunately, they look like, how do you say in English, crap. So, I'm kind of moderately enthusiastic about the way this building looks. And I say that I have this intuition because I would like to see elevations.
Right.
So to use the normal formula, I would say in the next, when you do this for your portfolio, do draw the elevations.
Of course, thank you.
I'm stuck a little bit on, you mentioned the word party, and I'm stuck a little bit wondering what's driving the form of this building. I don't understand where it came from. It doesn't, to me, say wood. I see wood. But I feel like maybe you can talk a little bit about why it's a rectangle or split, why you're cutting out that little bit at the corners, which I think is stingy. I mean, it's nice to get balcony back, but they're really tiny, and I don't understand at all where that's coming from. It just kind of seemed like a blip we slid past. And especially if you're going to use concrete as your floor spandrel pieces, that can be anything. And you can cut those, what are they, 20 by 10 planks to any shape you want. So why isn't this thing more expressive and making more of a statement? And did you explore that? Maybe you did. But it seems to me that you're forcing wood into what was a formerly steel package, and I don't buy it.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't, that's a great point. I haven't actually explored what structural CLT could do with different formwork. I think this is just sort of the standardized billet or CLT structural panel that's out there now, and so I just sort of assumed that that was going to be my toolkit. And because I was still learning how to design this high-rise building, maybe that was a safe option to begin with. But that's a great suggestion.
You guys have taken on a ton. That's not to discredit all the work and the thought that's gone into it. That's not at all. It just gets me back to kind of the bigger idea, and
Sure.
You're creating form. And does that form make sense? And what's driving it?
You took a serious subject that architecture has an effect on climate change, and that's very good. But what really is sustainable? What makes a building sustainable? So you took from SOM that the CO2 emission is better with wood than with concrete and steel. But sustainability, it's not just like one material or one system. And I think also because we are now too much with technology, and what technology can do that we lose the basics, the very simple basic like spacing, you see, how you're bringing light to the building, exposures, openings. And you're using here glass like you're using in steel buildings, but it is really more economical to use the wood. And I agree with you. I also feel that the wood maybe is in this high-rise is a little bit forced. Because you're not convincing me that this is really the right material for this building. You're using concrete, and I don't see here that the wood is solving the structural problem. So first of all, I want to hear from you what is really sustainable in a building, and not just the material and putting systems, this kind of system and this kind of system, but it really has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with transportation, with where people are coming from to live or to work in this place, where are you bringing the wood from? because you have places that have wood at all, so it's not sustainable. So it's kind of not black and white. And I think that just the question and the knowledge that architecture might change, it might contribute or help climate change, that's important.
Absolutely. I think when I started to conceptualize this project, I was really overwhelmed by that exact question that you asked, which is, what is sustainability and what are its different components? And I think this project, this thesis, spoke to me because it addresses something that is happening now, here and now. I'm a city person. It's happening in the cities, and it's happening at a very rapid rate. I frequent a family in Boston, so I'm there very often, and every time I'm there, I'm seeing a new building in construction, and it's just very rapid and very relevant. And so I think that taking that framework and then asking the question of, okay, if this is a typology that we're exploring, then what does sustainability mean for this typology? I think that pushed me to explore, a number of different strategies, thinking about, water filtration, or thinking about biophilia, or the material of the building itself. And so I think through this thesis, I was sort of trying to do a little bit of everything. And maybe the next step forward is to think about, okay, but really what are the big moves, and what is the total calculation, or is there even a calculation for this building? But sort of really tying that back into the question that was asked in the beginning. But I really use this as a vehicle to explore some sort of systems and processes that I wanted to learn about with this building typology.
So I think you've done a lot of that exploration. You've learned a ton. And now I go back to some of Eric's comments that I agree with in terms of going back now and sort of pulling through this from the water to the big dig, and how do you really map that and pull that whole experience through the building in that way. I feel like everything is very linear in this direction. You haven't really addressed sort of the really amazingness of the site being between the water and the big dig, and those are basically the two biggest elements in Boston. And now, how do you really take advantage of that? The other thing I would, and I'd love to hear actually some of the committee thinks on this too, but I look at this building and I sort of try to imagine how we would be critiquing it, or how you would be critiquing it if it weren't in wood. Mm-hmm. If you didn't know it was a wood building, which we know it's not all wood, but so I feel like I worry that you've gotten stuck on that. I mean, even just that these floor plates are rendered in a sort of fleshy, like wood material, and they're just really laid out there instead of, obviously the floors might be a different material, right? It might not all be wood. You've rendered it in other materials too here on the lobby. So I think that you're building in a way that's stacking instead of thinking about it in section as well. And just because of the material you've chosen doesn't mean you're going to be limited. And so now maybe taking a step back and looking at it in section, and where could you open up some of those gardens on the corners, get more light in, have some double height spaces. And I loved the comment about the green. I feel like the green needs to be 3 stories high. I feel like it needs to be more of an element. So just
thanks for all of the really good comments. I'm glad that Juhi got to have the conversation she wanted to have at the beginning of the thesis. And it's been wonderful working with Juhi. I loved listening to your oral presentation. In my mind, it was one of the best presentations that I've heard, oral presentations that I've heard since I've been here at Maryland. I think there was a learning curve in terms of the program of a residential skyrise. I want to thank you for really shifting gears from this museum that was more almost a folly of climate change, and then saying, I'm going to do this high-rise residential building I'm going to learn about mass timber. I know that was a big learning curve for you, and you took it on. So that's great. That's wonderful. I thought the comments about passive design were really helpful here, especially thinking about how to bring light into the building, and thinking about, you know, potentially the elevations or the building skin as something that's thicker and has more depth and can really be breathing. I think that's part of the didactic potential of wood, you know, in a skyrise, that there's a sort of thickened, breathable facade. I think some of the critiques of, you know, the opportunities that mass timber presents for architecture, you know, some of the critiques were fairly harsh, and I think they were good critiques because to me the thesis is twofold. It's about climate change and dealing with carbon sequestration and looking at systems like algal carbon capture, but it's also like what are the potential aesthetic opportunities that wood brings to us, and I think there's much more to be explored in that realm, and that's really exciting, you know. And now that you have the principles, like you're going to go through that, so that's wonderful. To me, I'm most excited in this project about that green alley. I think that was a nice program piece, and you know, that's what you see on the facade. Some of the comments about going further with that, I think, are spot on, but you're really onto something there. That is a way to create a public plaza in the sky, and that's how you extend the greenway and the blueway. And so, thank you very much for a great semester.
Thank you, everyone.